As we now begin the last full chapter that we're going to be doing in trig, we're going to look at three distinct pieces here in chapter 9. We're not going to do section 7, 6 or 7. We're doing the first 5 sections: polar coordinates, polar equations, and graph. That's our first piece, and that's what we'll look at today, or this week actually. Then Des Moines theorem, complex numbers, and how to work with complex numbers from a polar position. And then we'll finish up with looking at vectors and some arithmetic of vectors in a flat surface, looking at vectors. So starting off with polar coordinates. Start off with polar coordinates. Now we're used to rectangular coordinates, the x, y plane, the x, y plane. And we're using it to now look at it polar. So we're going to talk about, again, 0, 0 point, right, being, which we're going to call the pole. And then the positive x-axis is the polar axis, and everything's measured from there. And so polar coordinates are going to be an ordered pair, but instead of x, y, they're going to be r theta, a distance, radius idea, and an angle, radius and an angle. And so when we're looking at a polar coordinate, we've got the pole. Everything's measured from the pole. If we're measuring positive now, okay, that's counterclockwise. So from the pole, we measure the angle. And then from the polar axis, we measure the angle. That becomes our initial side. And then we go out the terminal side a certain distance. And that's our r. So r theta is the ordered pair. For example, here's the polar axis, pi over 4, okay, 1/4 of the way through the first quadrant, and then 2, and we've come up to that point. And so we get points just like we get with x, y. So r theta, r theta. That's how we do it, right? So if we are looking at doing points, right? Now, here's the polar axis, and if we always mark the angle first. And if r is negative, that means instead of going in the direction of the angle, go the opposite way. Go the opposite way. So -3, 2 pi over 3. So from the polar axis, we measure 2 pi over 3, brings us into the second quadrant. And instead of going in the direction of that angle, -3 says go the opposite way. And so the point -3, 2 pi over 3 would be right here. Right? So that's how we plot points using polar coordinates. Polar coordinates, r theta, r theta. Distance and an angle, a distance and an angle.